burnout is discussed a lot. Not every physician is burned out that does this, though. I think some just get tired, after 20, 25 years of practice. There's a lot of intense thought that goes into practicing medicine. So that's another. And the other thing is, think about it. We're pretty much kids when we decide to go into medicine for the most part, even if we're 20 years old. And there are many people I've talked to, particularly guests that I have on my podcast, that say it just wasn't what I thought it was.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on Prescription for Success. I'm delighted to have you, and before we go any further, I want to remind you that Prescription for Success is a production of MD Coaches, a company dedicated to putting healthcare professionals back in charge of healthcare delivery by coaching, mentoring, and supporting physicians at all stages of their career. You can find out more at mymdcoaches.com. We'll get into today's interview in just a moment, but first I have a word from Panacea Financial, a provider of banking services for doctors because it was founded by doctors. They have nationwide loan, checking, and savings options designed specifically for doctors and doctors in training. Their specialized suite of financial products gives medical students, residents, and practicing physicians greater freedom to forge their own futures, and at affordable rates. By reducing financial barriers and burdens, Panacea Financial ensures that all doctors have increased capacity to serve their patients and the population at large. If you need a good home for your banking needs, just go to panaceafinancial.com. That's panaceafinancial.com. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, a member of FDIC. My interview guest today is not only a board-certified family practitioner, he also has a master's degree in public health, and he's a certified physician executive as well. In 2017, he started a podcast called Physician Nonclinical Careers, and now he's listed in the FeedSpot Top 20 Physician Podcasts you must follow in 2020 and 2021. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. John Jurica and find out exactly how he did that. What a great pleasure it is for me today to be speaking with a fellow podcaster, Dr. John Jurica. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Randy. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you. I had the honor of being on your show not long ago, so looking forward to being the inquisitor rather than the questioned one. You've been a very busy guy, John, and as is the usual case on this show, I want to start at the beginnings. When did you first realize that you had an interest in going to medical school?
Well, that probably was very early on, although I didn't have a real good sense of what that meant because I didn't really have any family members that were involved in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any idea where the influence came from? What put the idea in your head?
Let's see. It was probably Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, Dr. Welby, maybe. Although I did
good for you. I hesitate making that confession myself, but it's just true.
Yeah. Well, I did have a Dr. Marzanelli that would do house calls and give me some penicillin injections when I had an earache or something. So he was fascinating. But yeah, it was mostly just general knowledge from TV and reading and so forth.
And at the point that you started to undergraduate school, you went to University of Illinois, Chicago.
Yes.
Majoring in chemistry. At the time that you enrolled, was that your plan? You knew you were going to apply to medical school eventually?
Yeah, I felt that was what I was going to do. It was sort of the thing to do, at least from where I was. If you were good in science and you had good grades, and when I went into the U of I, it seemed like every other person in my class was either not going to make it or they were trying for med school. So it was kind of a competitive environment.
I see. And you're an honors graduate, so I'm gathering there was not too much of a struggle there.
No, it wasn't bad to get into med school. Actually, what happened after my 4 years in undergrad is I applied to several state schools and I was soundly rejected.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I had they had a 5 point, but basically the equivalent of a 4.0 average. But I was going to the U of I, and the campus actually was quite new. It was a campus that was built in the late 60s as a commuter school for the local citizens of Chicago. And so I don't think it had really attained any kind of a recognition, and there was a little bit, some lack of clarity on how valid the grades were. So yeah, I was rejected, and it probably was one of the best things that happened to me.
I had a similar experience and a similar reaction as well. And I'm interested to hear why you felt like that was, I'm sure at the time it was a little bit unnerving, but later on you say you felt like it was a good thing. And so tell us why.
Well, I had to figure out what I was going to do. Was I going to reapply? What was I going to do in the meantime? I was living at home. I was commuting. I've got 9 siblings, so we're 12 of us living together in our house in Niles. And
Wow.
yeah, we were pretty much on our own after about age 10 in that family. So I had to get a job. So I got a job as a chemist at Kraft Foods, which was headquartered right outside of Chicago. And I worked as a food chemist for a couple of years. And I met a couple of guys that I ended up rooming with and became kind of 2 of my best friends. Eventually was introduced to my first wife by one of those gentlemen and got married. And so just the whole trajectory of my life kind of changed. But looking back, it was one of probably the better things that ever happened to me.
Yeah, I understand. I think a lot of us that sort of drive on a very straight road and find ourselves in something as demanding as medical school or any other kind of highly intensive education probably could use more preparation than we get before we get there. And it sounds like that was exactly your experience, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of maturity that you don't have, and especially nowadays, it seems like it's less, kids are so dependent on their parents till they're, 23, 24, 25. So that maturity helps. I know a lot of the schools actually look for that maturity now when they're accepting medical students to medical schools. So yeah, I think it would help me a lot, actually.
But indeed, you were accepted eventually.
Yes, I was.
At University of Illinois. And once you got there, was medical school much like what you expected or something different?
Well, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I knew there was going to be some classroom work and that, and eventually I'd get into clinical. I had a deathly fear of patients. I was an introvert. I was shy as heck. I was one of those people that, wouldn't say a word for a couple of days in a row. And people would say, oh, still waters run deep, I guess. But, no. And we had a kind of an interesting setup at that school. The first year you would do the basics. And then the last 3 years you would get shipped out to one of the other schools. So the first year was either in Chicago or in Champaign. And then the next 3 years were at one of the other 4 campuses. And I ended up going to Champaign and staying there for the full 4 years.
In spite of the challenges and what you described as maybe a lack of preparedness, I don't hear you saying anything about it was dreadful or awful or unlike what you expected or anything of that nature. Was it a good experience for you? I think it was. I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it was very good. And it was also interesting because they had a self-study for the first year. So we walked in the first week and they gave us about 6-inch thick document and said, here's where you get everything you need to read. We'll do some labs, we'll do some anatomy, and then we'll give you a couple tests this year. And when we're done, you'll either pass or you'll fail. I mean, I kind of liked it, actually, because I would study hard and work hard, and then I'd take a few days off and go visit my family up in Chicago, and I thought it was a good approach.
Yeah, that sounds pretty agreeable. And then at the end, your decision was to go into family medicine. How'd you make that decision?
Well, again, I didn't have a lot of mentors to follow. And I always thought in my mind, medicine was about taking care of the whole family. That's kind of been my experience. I thought, well,
Hmm.
of course, in each rotation you do, usually one of the docs or professors are going to tell you, go into this specialty. So I figured they were all, they all kind of canceled each other out, and I was going to do something where I could take care of the whole family. So I just stuck with family medicine.
And it looks to me like that early in your career, you began to look for ways to make the experience bigger. You began to get interested in management fairly early, from what I can tell from your CV. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, and it wasn't really intentional. I wanted to do something. I had some free time, and so I naturally was attracted to the CME side of things. We didn't have a good CME program at the hospital, so I brought in courses for the family physicians through the Illinois Academy. And then they looked at me from the hospital side and said, well, we need a chair for the committee. So since you're doing CME, why don't you become the chair? And then I was looking for ways to moonlight. So I became the physician advisor for make a little extra money on the side. And so it just kind of snowballed. And if people needed help doing something, I was usually one to volunteer. And most of my colleagues, you know how physicians are, especially in that day and age, we got work to do. We don't want to spend time that we're not getting compensated for at the hospital on committees and that kind of thing.
Exactly. So that was the beginning of what has been a very active career on the non-clinical side. And we're going to spend some time talking about your awesome podcast, Physician Non-Clinical Careers. But tell us a little bit about how that unfolded. Tell us some more about the more structured and the more financially successful management positions that you went through during those years.
Well, again, they were looking for people to help out, so I naturally got attracted to helping as a medical director for the family planning clinic. So I was getting a little bit of a stipend for that. And then I decided to do some occupational medicine, got a master's degree in public health to kind of support that. And then I became the medical director of that, still practicing full time. And the thing is, I became more and more attracted to it. I found that I was helping larger groups of patients by virtue of, helping with protocols and helping manage it. And so after several years of that, I thought, well, I really want to get into this. And I asked the CEO if he might need a VP for medical affairs. We had never had a physician executive at our hospital. And he said, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I started that part-time. And the more I got into it, the more I liked it because I was helping improve quality and patient safety and helping the staff, with protocols. And so it just was something that just naturally built over time.
It sounds like you were a better fit for it than most physicians that I know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I think most physicians are really put off by the bureaucracy, and if you disagree with that, I'd be interested to hear. But that's what I see. Most of the physicians that I know would rather die than go to a meeting or be involved in those kinds of things. But yet, you found that it was something that really appealed to you.
It did. It was attractive and it was appealing to me. At the same time, though, I started to get a little bit of burnout on the clinical side. I had a lot of chronic patients that were very needy. I was very bad at firing my patients. One of my partners was was the pro at that, but I wasn't. And so they would just continue to pile up and they become more and more demanding. And so I just naturally kind of drifted from the clinical to the non-clinical. And that's what ended up being the CMO of the hospital.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Now you have taken all that experience and built a way to share it with other physicians in physician non-clinical careers. So you want to tell us about how the podcast started?
Yeah, well, I was finishing up as CMO. I decided I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. So I actually left that position. I joined some investors, and we opened an urgent care center north of Chicago. And I was doing that for 2 reasons. One, because it would be more flexible for me to cut back when I was approaching retirement. And then also because I always wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So I did that, and I had some more free time on my hands. I thought, well, I've done a lot of non-clinical things, so I want to learn more about non-clinical careers and side gigs and things like that for physicians. So I thought, well, what better way to learn about that than to start a podcast and then have some of those people teach me what they're doing. And I started to just learn about it. Yeah.
And just to make sure I understand, at the time that you put together this urgent care system, did you stop seeing patients altogether at that point, or were you still involved in clinical practice at all?
Yeah, good question. When I was CMO, I had stopped seeing patients completely for about 3.5 years, and then I had to go back because as the medical director for the urgent care, I actually had to take care of patients again. So I was about a year behind getting reboard certified, so I had to study and do that. And I had lost my DEA, although I still had my license, thank God. So yeah, I did do a lot of remedial sort of studying and prepping to do that. But yeah, and then I went back to seeing full-time patients, 15 shifts a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were playing
yes, I was.
both sides of the game.
Now, I've since cut back to 1 day a week, so I'm pretty, part-time now. And that's why I have so much time to spend on the podcast and the other things that I'm doing.
That was going to be my next question. I was curious as to if you see any patients anymore. And I guess it's, I would imagine that it helps to still be at least exposed to the clinical experience if you're going to do the kinds of things that you're doing now. Would you agree?
Yes. And I do like doing it, at least once a week now. And I've always been, impressed by, there are CEOs of major healthcare systems that still occasionally see patients 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks. So it's kind of, I find that interesting.
Well, you've certainly done very, very well with it. So back to the podcast, this thing has done very well. You started in 2017, and by 2020, you were in the FeedSpot top 20 of physician podcasts to follow.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty awesome.
I'm not sure, what the competition there is like exactly, although I do listen to a lot of podcasts. But yeah, I mean, you know what? I think it's just, I tried to follow the rules and be consistent, and it seemed to work out well.
Well, it really is a fascinating show, and I want to urge everybody who is listening to this podcast to take advantage of it because there are some fascinating individuals that appear on there, and you are a great interviewer. It also is connected to a Facebook group, I believe, as well.
Yes. The Facebook group, I think, predates the podcast, although they might have been started at the same time. The Facebook group was actually started by Dr. Laura McCain, and she invited me in to help. It had about 4,000 members in it at the time, and now 3 years later, we've got like 16,000 physician members in the group, and it's all about non-clinical careers. Yeah, it's a pretty popular group. It's international, but most people in the group are in the United States, although it kind of makes you worry a little bit that there's 16,000 physicians looking for non-clinical work. I mean, I'd be a little worried if I was a patient.
Well, I think we're all aware that is a real thing, and I'm kind of interested in your opinion on why that is the case.
Oh, why there seems to be such an interest in doing something else other than medicine?
People are leaving the bedside. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, there's burnout is discussed a lot. Not every physician is burned out that does this, though. I think some just get tired, after 20, 25 years of practice, there's a lot of intense thought that goes into practicing medicine. So that's another. And the other thing is, think about it. We're pretty much kids when we decide to go into medicine for the most part, even if we're 20 years old. And there are many people I've talked to, particularly guests that I have on my podcast, that say it just wasn't what I thought it was. It didn't fulfill me the way I thought it would fulfill me. I like science, but I didn't maybe necessarily like people that much or whatever it might be. And there's a divergence. And people don't want to give up, though, what they've learned in medical school and residency if they've done that or fellowship. And so they're looking for ways to do something related to medicine, but that may not involve direct patient care, most of the time. Then you've got the liability. I mean, what other profession is sued an average of every other, year or two? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I hate to ask you a nearly impossible question, but I'm going to go out here and do it anyway.
Okay.
I really enjoy your podcast, and you've got lots of episodes out there, obviously, over the last 4 years, 5 years, whatever it's been. I'm curious if there are any interviews, any non-clinical physician situations that you've talked about that particularly stand out in your mind, your top 10 or top 5 or whatever you want to give us.
Well, it depends on how I look at it. I mean, there's certain personalities that I love to talk to on the podcast that I resonate with, like Mike Wu-Ming, who's an entrepreneur. He's been on a couple of times. A friend of mine now, Andrew Wilner, who is an expert in locums, but he's practicing neurology right now. And he's been on 2 or 3 times. He's written a book. Actually, Mike has written a book as well. So they're definitely ones worth looking for and listening to. In terms of the careers that impress me the most, I really love hearing about the medical experts because they continue to work and they make a lot of money doing medical expert work. And it just seems like something that really leverages what they're doing. And then
in trial testimony, is that what you mean?
Yeah, it usually starts with chart reviews, record reviews, and then they sometimes do depositions, and then rarely they'll do trials. That's kind of how it works out. So if I were going back, I would do that maybe, or independent medical exams, or what I did, which is CMO, which I love, interviewing people who are, CMOs, CMIOs, chief quality officers at hospitals. So I've got several interviews that address those topics.
Well, you really have had a lot of interesting people on there, and I urge all of our listeners to check it out. It's Physician Non-Clinical Careers podcast hosted by John Jurica. And what I'd like to do now, John, is give you an opportunity to share your wisdom with us. One of the things that we like to do, in fact, the basis for our podcast is for people to tell us how you go about being successful. So I'm going to close my mic and we will listen as Dr. John Jurica gives us his prescriptions for success.
All right. Well, as I thought about this, I tried to think of the things that seemed to help me the most, and that if I were advising my younger self or somebody else that is maybe a mentee or someone, what would I focus on? So the first one is just to be a lifelong learner, which really aligns with being a physician. And we're all lifelong learners. So some more so than others. I've kind of made a commitment in my life to just keep learning new things and keep moving forward. Now, when I talk about being a lifelong learner, of course, there's all the medical and the clinical things, but I think we should stack multiple new skills over time: management skills, leadership skills, or technology, or learning finances, or I don't know, how to run a podcast or something like that. But I also think that people should remain curious in their interpersonal relationships. I've had some times in my life where my relationships kind of suffered. My first marriage failed, and I decided I was going to learn how to better communicate with my family and my kids, and so that was something that I learned. When I was a CMO, we had some ongoing C-suite group coaching, which was awesome. And one of us would be on the hot seat every month or so. And what we were taught was, number one, listen a lot, be curious consistently. Don't respond to someone with a yes, but rather just sit back and say, tell me more. So I think in interpersonal relationships and in our careers, being a lifelong learner and remaining curious is really one major key. The second thing I think about is this issue of consistency. Now, I could have talked about being diligent or perseverance or grit or something like that. Those are kind of attributes of a person's personality, but the consistency is the outcome. So I would say in whatever you do, if you've made a commitment to follow a path, to start a business, to start a new avocation, whatever it might be, try and do it with consistency. I was thinking the other day of a family member of mine who she's really struggled her whole life. I mean, she's had financial issues. She's had cars repossessed. Her house was foreclosed. And she was in a business where she had to provide a professional service. And the thing was, she kept moving around. She'd build up some clients and she'd move to a new place. And then she'd leave the state. Then she'd come back and she'd have weird hours and they would change constantly. And it just pointed out to me that people need consistency if they want to rely on somebody. And to be successful takes consistency. We talk about so many overnight successes, supposedly, and there's really nothing, or there's no such thing as an overnight success. All those overnight successes were actually consistent for years before they were discovered. So definitely consistency is something that I would focus on. And then I guess the other thing I would think about and try and encourage is saying yes to things that push you outside your comfort zone. And I'm trying to think back in my life. You don't want to say yes to everything. You want to be a little bit picky. But, when I was working at Kraft and I was still living at home, and I had a couple of the food scientists ask me out for lunch one day and said, we're going to move into a house and we wondered if you could be our roommate. I said, okay, I hadn't been thinking about that, but why not? So I did that, and I definitely lived to appreciate that. I had a friend once ask me if I'd go trekking with him in Nepal. I thought for a little bit. I said, well, sure, why not? Just show me where to show up and tell me, when we're leaving, and I'll get ready and we'll go. I had someone ask me about going gorilla trekking in Rwanda and whitewater rafting on the Nile River. And I never thought about that either, but it was really an interesting experience. So I would suggest that, try to say yes to the things that push you through into a new area outside your zone of comfort. And I think that's where most of the growth occurs. Maybe like, starting an online business or starting a podcast. And remember too, the reason why I bring this up rather than just saying, being aggressive with these things is to say yes, is because somebody that's asked you that question has confidence in your ability to do it. So that's why I would say, well, we can search for those things on our own. When someone asks you, they're implicitly saying, I think this is something you could take on, you could handle, like being CMO for the hospital. And so I would say yes to those whenever possible. So those are my three items, I guess. One is be a lifelong learner and be curious and be consistent in what you do, and try to say yes to things that push you outside your comfort zone.
I like that a lot, John. I particularly like the part about just say yes. That is truly the doorway to a lot of success if people will just take the leap, and it certainly has worked out very well for you.
Absolutely.
Wow. Trekking in Nepal. That's
Yeah.
that is my idea of a big yes.
Oh boy.
So,
That was a good one.
well, John, look, it's been really a great honor and fascinating to talk to you, to have you swap roles with me since our last get together. And I appreciate you being here on the show. I'm sure our listeners are going to enjoy it. Before we get away from here, I want to give you an opportunity to promote anything that you want to promote. So go ahead and tell us where people can find you and how you would like for them to follow you.
Okay. Well, number one, I would mention the podcast again, as you did. Physician Non-Clinical Careers Podcast. You can find it on any podcast app. And yes, my interview of you will have been posted by the time this airs, I believe. So just look back 1 or 2 episodes and you will be able to hear a little bit more directly from Dr. Randy Cook. The next thing I would, the Physician Non-Clinical Career Hunters Facebook group, just look that up. Now this is for people that are considering doing some kind of non-clinical or non-traditional career. Look for the Facebook group. Like I say, there's a lot of coaches in that group that share with everybody. But the big thing I would say is go to my website, nonclinicalphysicians.com. And in fact, if you use that URL at nonclinicalphysicians.com/free webinar 1, I've done this webinar about 6 or 7 times where I walk through about 25 different non-clinical, non-traditional careers. And I've got the replay there, and it's absolutely free, and there's nothing being sold in it. It's just, it's usually I do it for the Facebook group, and it's just to share with physicians that are just getting started what's out there, what's part-time, what's full-time, and what are the most popular non-clinical careers you might think about.
Well, that's very generous of you, John, and I'm not surprised. You are a generous person, obviously, and I appreciate your generosity in spending some time with us today.
Well, it's been fun.
So thank you again very much, Dr. John Jurica, entrepreneur extraordinaire. Go find him on his website.
It's been my pleasure. It's been great, Randy.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed our conversation today. And by the way, don't forget to reach out to Panacea Financial for your banking needs as a physician, because they are built by physicians. Panacea's PRN personal loan was designed especially for physicians and physicians in training. Go to panaceafinancial.com and open your new account today. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, member FDIC. And that just about wraps up this episode of Prescription for Success. Thanks so much to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And no matter where you follow our podcast, please like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know if you leave a 5-star rating. Your suggestions always help us get better. Thank you so much for listening today. And remember to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.